I have a get out of jail free card.
I think we got it covered pretty good here. I'm just
Late March, it was early March. My wife's, I was asking
Okay, it's 2 o'clock. We're going to get the study session started. For those of you that have not attended a study session, I'll give you a little outline of how this is going to go today. Police Chief Brad Nelson has a presentation he's going to make. At that time, Following this presentation, the commission will have questions and maybe some comments for Chief Nelson at that time. After the commission has asked their questions, and we will open it up to the public. Again, everyone remember we have a 4 o'clock deadline that we need to be back at the other building for our regular city commission meeting. When we do open it up to the public, we will have 2 minutes for comments, and we're doing that just because it appears there may be a few people want to make a comment today. So again, if you are going to come forward and make comments, it's beneficial if you're not saying the same thing that someone else said before you. So we'll address that when we get to that. So with this, I will turn it over to Chief Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to be clear as far as the mask goes. I am 6 feet away, folks, but I want you to be able to understand me. That's why I do not have my mask on. I'm 6 feet away here and here, so put that out there. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. I know 2 o'clock is not a convenient time for a lot of people, but it means a lot that you folks are here. First of all, I am Brad Nelson. I've been your chief since December of 2013. Because of the topics that we're talking about today, I do think it's relevant that you know that I am a 3rd generation military veteran. I was in the Air Force Reserve for 13 years, and also I've been a police officer for 36 years. This is the 3rd community that I've been proud to serve in. With that said, Mayor, fellow commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to respond to the July 15th Sunflower Coalition policy proposal. I would ask that even though our audience may have opposing views, we maintain our decorum and treat each other with respect. I truly believe that regardless of what path we choose, we will be a better community for having this discussion. My intent is to present the PowerPoint presentation to you that I prepared and then have a question and answer session. With that said, I would appreciate greatly if we could hold off on questions until the completion of each topic. Thank you. These are what we're talking about today. I'm going to try not to speak fast, but those are the topics. We'll talk about the federal 1033 surplus program first. Can the folks in the back hear me okay? Okay, thank you. What exactly is the 1033 program? I'm not going to read every line on here, of course. I don't think I need to. Hopefully most of you read this. But this program has been around since 1991. It's a way basically for the military to provide equipment not only to law enforcement, but that's what we're talking about today, to law enforcement, but to provide surplus equipment to law enforcement. 2 things that aren't on the slide that maybe you may or may not know. There's 2 types of property that you can get. You can get controlled property, which is what we're here today for. It's things such as weapons, vehicles, and aircraft. This is called controlled property. It's basically property that is loaned to law enforcement agencies. When I say loaned, it's not our property. They loan it to us. We have to account for it each year. So it's not like they just give us 17 rifles and 3 APCs and say go forth. You have to account for it each year you have it. You also have to justify each item that you request from the 1033 program. You have to justify it, and you have to demonstrate what the purpose is as far as law enforcement purpose. There's 2 types. There's controlled property, like I said. There's also non-controlled property. Non-controlled is things that any of the public can get for free, well, except for transportation. That's things such as office supplies, desks. So when people think of the 1033 program, it is not just weapons, it is not just vehicles. In fact, 92% of what's acquired from the 1033 program is desks and such. Other equipment that's not weapons. It's important to note, I underlined it there, that 5% are actual weapons, small arms, and less than 1% are tactical vehicles. And as you know, we do in fact have a tactical vehicle. These are what our prohibited items are that the military states that what we can and can't have. It's important to note there as far as the caliber weapons, 50 cal or greater. Another way to put that is you can have 50 cal or under 50 cal as far as ammunition goes, not ammunition, weapons goes, I'm sorry. Also, part of the Sunflower Coalition policy proposal states or requests that we not have any weaponized drones or grenades. I would just like to say at no time in the 1033 program could you ever acquire a weaponized drone from the United States military. And as far as grenades go, grenade launchers, yes, there are many agencies in the nation that have received grenades, but you don't get grenade launchers, but you don't actually receive grenades with them. I mean, it's a pretty big separation. You get the launcher, And civilian law enforcement uses these 40mm launches. They use them for smoke and gas. Okay, they don't hand out grenades, so it's kind of clear, but it sounds really terrible if you think the United States military is giving us grenades and grenade launchers. They are not, I want to be clear on that. The sole intent for these grenade launchers is, again, is for gas or smoke. This is our involvement. At one point I wasn't going to list everything we have, but this is an all-inclusive list of everything we've received over the years since 1991. Again, I've only been your chief since 2013, but we went back because we have to keep records of everything we've received. And that is everything. I can say since I've been here in 2013, we have not received anything. It's not because I don't believe in the program, it's just because nothing that we saw was anything we needed on that particular day. So no, we haven't been involved since 2012 with the actual program, but we're still enrolled in the program. It says clearly there, all this is returned. It's all been returned back or transferred. And when I say transferred, remember, if you have weapons or armored vehicles, those are on loan. You can't just throw them away. You have to give them back to the military if you wear them out. So if you have 4 rifles and you wear them out somehow, you don't just cut them up and throw them away. You have to return them to the government. That's the way they understand where all their weapons go to. The Humvee we had a Humvee. I think most of you know what a Humvee is, but we had that in 2014. I asked that that be returned because I truly did not see there was any practical need to have a Humvee. Plus, we were storing it, and it was just deteriorating basically in front of us. Everything else, like I said, has been returned except for the APC. The one M14 rifle, because it says the word rifle, I'll tell you what happened to that. The M14 rifle was transferred to the Salina County Sheriff's Department, so we do not have that in our arsenal right now. I think this is pretty clear what the purpose is. I mean, the purpose is, bottom line, is to protect anybody inside or anybody on the other side, right? And if somebody's shooting at you, and if you don't think it happens in Salina, Kansas, you haven't been reading the paper lately, it happens here, trust me. We've had 3 officer-involved shootings in the past 18 months. So I've heard people say we don't need this. I've heard people say we don't even need rifles. And that just simply amazes me. But this is the purpose of our APC. It's a 2006 model. We have had it for a while, but that's the primary purposes of this APC. This is pretty clear. We don't just bring it out because we're bored. We don't bring it out to parade around. We do display it in community events because we do want to be transparent. We do want to tell people we have this thing, but we rarely use it. But I can tell you folks, if you need it and you don't have it, that's not good. You're going to have to borrow it from somebody. So the fact that we have one is fantastic, like I said, but we don't use it when it's not needed. I can say I do approve each deployment of this APC, Armored Personnel Carrier. With that said, the community I came from in central Missouri, a little bit bigger than here, I was on their SWAT team for 10 years, and I can tell you I did about 400 some operations. Most of them were high-risk search warrants, and we had an APC. I can tell you, I don't know if that makes me a subject matter expert, but I think I do know about SWAT, and I do know about when we should deploy a SWAT vehicle. This is how we presently use these past 4 years. We definitely have to train on it because this is an 8-ton vehicle. I mean, we have to train in it, we have to train on it. That's how many times we've used it in the last 3.5, 4 years. Definitely the public relations event is a big part of it. Again, that's part of transparency. We don't want people all of a sudden seeing this and becoming alarmed by it. We have it, we've never hit it. In fact, if you can see in the bottom right picture there, that's our annual Cops in Costume event that we have at the Law Enforcement Center. And that is a line of people and children, predominantly children, waiting to have their picture taken on this APC. These are the concerns that I took out of the actual policy proposal. They're verbatim what they are. They specifically request, when I say they, the Sunflower Coalition, I apologize for that. Sunflower Coalition specifically requests that we remove ourselves from the 1033 program. I'm opposed to that, and I will tell you why. This is what I propose to the commissioners by resolution. Any future requests, regardless if you're asking for desks or if you're asking for weapons, from the 1033 program by the SPD will require commission approval in an open meeting. I definitely think this will result in better transparency, oversight, and accountability. And if you're wondering why I don't want to withdraw from completely when I haven't used it since I've been here, it's because you just never know what you're going to need. I can tell you again, our APC is a 2006 model, so it's 14 years old. It doesn't last forever. It just gets old. I mean, there's no mistaking that it gets old. So at some point, I don't know if it'll be during my tenure, but at some point, we're going to be asking for a new APC or a military surplus APC. If we remove ourselves from this program today, I can tell you that to purchase a new APC would be about roughly, at the beginning price, $275,000. So $275,000 is what we need, what I'd have to approach the commission for and ask if we wanted to replace our present APC, or we could acquire one through the military for a fraction of that price. That is the primary reason why I do not wish to remove ourselves from the 1033 program. And at this point, I will entertain questions from the commission.
So, Chief Nelson, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm bringing this over close enough. Apologies if you can't hear me. Am I to assume then the proposed resolution for the city commission would be both controlled and non-controlled items that we would be looking to acquire? You said all, and so that would mean any acquisitions would come for city commission review?
That is correct. I was trying to divide it, but it gets a little bit confusing, but just make it all, I'm fine with that, yes. Anything that we get from the program.
Thank you.
One quick question on that, Chief Nelson. Because of the timing of, and I don't know how these go out for bid, going to the city commission for approval, would that be a hindrance? Would we need to approve it, or would just notification that it has been purchased would be?
Well, I would like the path of least resistance, but I would hate to have it and then you tell me I can't have it. So I would ask you for, I would propose via a blue sheet agenda item that I acquire these items beforehand.
And sorry, following up on Mayor Hoffick's observation and question, we deal with a lot of time-sensitive topics. Generally, it's from developers needing a certain approval by a certain date or whatever. But it's not uncommon for us to call a special meeting, and if that's something that we absolutely had to do to meet the deadline of an application, if you felt that something was absolutely imperative for us to have, I don't think any of us have ever declined to do a special meeting when circumstances warranted it.
I appreciate that.
Mike's great here in the end. And another aspect that we talked about is if it truly is imperative, by category, we could pre-approve it, and the commission could have thought that through, given formal approval, and then if it ever becomes available, we can pursue it. But we chose to, as the chief said, be transparent and not try to parse all that out in advance today or even this year, but just position ourselves to commit to transparency and city commission approval.
Any other comments or questions?
The second topic is the Citizen Review Board proposal. That's something I can say as far as my experience goes. Where I came from, which was Columbia, Missouri, they did have a CRB, just so you know, I have some familiarity with them and how they operate. I think it's important that you understand how we got here today in order to understand where we're going to go to. This is a history of our LEAB. It's basically the legislature said we're going to do this. They said we're going to form a citizens advisory board, and that's what we did. I don't want to go too fast here. Probably of this, there's no more important bullet than any other ones, but I will say that the requiring all Kansas law enforcement agencies to adopt a detailed written policy to preempt racial profiling was probably long overdue, but it was extremely important, and that came out as early as 2005. Chief James Hill is the one who established the LEAB, Law Enforcement Advisory Board, back in 2007. I've never met the man, so I don't want to speak for him. So with that said, I'm probably going to speculate a little bit. But it appears, based on what I read, he used the same verbiage in the legislation to form this LEAB. And I say that because some of the verbiage is exactly the same, so it's a pretty safe assumption that's what he did. That picture there is our present board members. Sands Bridgeweiser, who unfortunately wasn't there for the picture. We have 2 vacancies that once this started becoming an issue, we chose not to fill. We didn't know where this was going, so actually there's 7 on the board, but there's only 5 presently on the board, but there should be 7. I think the biggest part of this slide, and it took me a while to wrap my mind around this, but after confirming with the city legal department, it was determined that the LEAB was not subject to the Kansas Open Meeting Act. So we were advised that. When I say we, Chief Hill was advised that, and that's why it appears he went the route he went. Because if you're not subject to it, he just didn't do it. I don't think there's anything malicious by it. This is how it was formed back in 2005 or 2007. It was not subject to the Kansas Open Meetings Act or the Kansas Open Records Act. What I do think happened though, I think that by not being subject to the Kansas Open Meeting Act, it certainly did result in the transparency concerns that we have today. I don't think anybody can doubt that, but I also don't think he did it on purpose. It just is what it is. Back then we didn't have to do it, so we didn't. Now, because of what's the world we live in, I certainly do think we should be subject to Tacoma and Cora, but as it's presently set up, we are not. This is the scope of the work. This is the part where there's definitely verbiage in that is exactly like the 2005 legislation. So there's no doubt that Chief Hill took the legislation and made that as part of the scope of work. I will say it's interesting that, and that is verbatim, as far as our scope of work goes, as far as the board's works go. I will say there is no reference in this to reviewing bias-based complaints. And I said that many times about reviewing bias-based complaints. The best I can tell too is between 2007 and 2013 when I got here, at some point we morphed into the board. They morphed into reviewing all bias-based policing complaints. Even though it's not listed as their scope of work, that's what they started doing. Because I can assure you when I got here, that's what we were doing, is reviewing bias-based complaints. Things changed in 2011. Instead of becoming a shall have a board if you're first class city, it became a may. So again, I don't want to speculate, but I would say that even though they didn't have to have the board, Chief Hill chose to continue the board even though he didn't have to. We can all read that, but may, second line, last word, may is a big word. It doesn't say shall, it says may. So at that point, Chief Hill could have disbanded the LEAB, and I'm glad he didn't, but he could have. What did come out of that in 2011 was a requirement that each year we file a racial or other bias-based policing report with the Office of Attorney General. And that is what we did. Our first report was in 2011. This here, hopefully you can all read that, but if you can't, maybe you can't in the back, but I can tell you, we'll talk about question 5 in detail here. Can you read that in the back? Yes or no? No. Okay. Well, I can say, I'll just read these quickly. Number 1, have all of the law enforcement officers serving in the agency who are not exempted from annual training by the Kansas Commission of Police Officer Standards and Training completed training required in KSA 22-4610 subsection? And the answer is yes for us every year. Does the agency have a policy prohibiting racial or other bias-based policing? The answer is yes every year. The key word there is policy. Number 3, does the agency mandate specific discipline for sustained complaints of racial or other bias-based policing? The answer is yes. Number 4, does the agency have a racial or other bias-based community advisory board, policing community advisory board? The answer is yes. And number 5 is does the agency have a racial or other bias-based policing comprehensive plan? The answer to that is no. At the time when this came up, as far as that goes, I'll speak here in one more slide, but there's a big difference between policy and plan, but we definitely got confused over the years. Number 6, does the agency collect extra pedestrian or traffic stop data pursuant to the racial and other bias-based policing statute beyond standard citation data? This is optional, but the answer is no to that. So this is question 5 again. I want to give Commissioner Hodges full credit. She's the one who discovered we were answering this question differently over the ensuing years. Question 5 again is, does the agency have a racial or other bias-based policing comprehensive plan? Again, plan versus policy. And since 2011, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but we have had 4 different staff members complete this report, resulting, there's the unfortunately, in different interpretations of policy versus plan. Now, I will say, as you can see at the bottom there, the actual plan is optional. The Attorney General's office does not confirm, validate, or collect individual agency plans. So it's literally just a question. Do you have a comprehensive plan? Do you have a comprehensive policy? And I'm pretty confident over the years we kind of merged the two together, because over 8 years we had yes, affirmative answers to do we have a plan. 4 times we said yes, and 4 times we said no, because we were confusing policy plan versus comprehensive plan versus comprehensive policy. But with that said, I directed the staff to make a bias-based policing comprehensive plan. We do now have, so the answer will be yes, we do now have a bias-based policing comprehensive plan. And in July of 2021, when this has to be submitted to the Attorney General, we're going to be answering yes to that question. And again, Commissioner, I just thank you for pointing that out. This is what constitutes a comprehensive plan. Again, it's optional. It's pretty clear, but when you have to have 7 points to explain what a comprehensive plan is, hopefully that'll make you understand how we had a little bit of difficulty understanding that. And also with phone conversations with the Attorney General's office, we are not the first department by far that had issues with comprehensive plan versus comprehensive policy. We had our listening session on June 29th. At that point, I was asked to submit a CRB policy in a study session, and that's what brought us here today, is that meeting we had back on June 29th at KWU. I looked at a whole bunch of things trying to come up with what I thought would be the best CRB for our community. They were all very helpful. I can say the National Association for Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement was phenomenal, probably the best out there. That had a lot of information. I completely agree with this, and since folks can't read in the back, I'm going to read this. A crucial part of this process is recognizing the historical factors that have led to distrust between police and communities and taking concrete steps to remedy them. An independent civilian complaints review board is necessary to ensure that the community is engaged in addressing police misconduct. That came from the NOACP, and I completely agree. We started looking at the top 10 cities. When I say the top 10 cities, the top 10 in population. Salina presently is number 10. So we included Hutchinson, which I believe is 11, but we included Hutchinson also. We looked at all these different communities to see what kind of community citizens review boards they had. I can say that Kansas City, Kansas did not respond. Hutchinson did not have one, and Shawnee did not have one. So that's why there's 7 there instead of the 9 you were asking for. I was asking for. This is what the Sunflower Coalition was specifically their concerns, the scope of the present LEAB, the review authority, their transparency, and the selection process. So certainly those were things that I took under consideration when I wrote a proposal for our own Citizens Review Board. This is straight from the National Association for Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement. I don't want to go too fast, but I don't want to go too slow. I think the ongoing is pretty important. Ongoing monitoring of law enforcement agencies' policies, procedures, training, management, and supervision practices is very important. When you're trying to analyze, 7 different cities and how they run their boards, it gets a little bit convoluted. But this is what I gleaned from what I read as far as the differences and the constants. You had the police chief choosing the members, the board representatives, anywhere from 7 to 15. The residency requirements were all over the place as far as, do you want them to be a city of Salina? Do you want them to be a Saline County resident? Some of them even said if you had a vested interest in the community, which they broke that down to say if you own a business in Saline County, if you own a business in Salina, you can be a member. That part's not for me to decide, but I'm just saying there were many, many differences as far as who could even apply to be on the board. The constants there, everything was post-review, so after the investigation is already done by the Internal Affairs Division. None of them had any subpoena powers or independent investigations. Certainly all reviews are confidential. This came from the International Association of Chiefs of Police. This really resonated with me as far as best fit versus best practice. Certainly best practice, you hear that a lot. I hadn't heard best fit that much. But basically, the analogy is you can't, every community is different. Every community has different issues. Some have really big time issues over a period of time. Some don't have any demonstrated issues, but we want to prepare for what could come in the future. So that's why this really resonated with me as far as the best fit versus best practice. As far as the least intrusive, what they're talking about that is, it's a really good analogy I read, that just like you demand the least use of force from your police officers to make an arrest, you want us to use the least use of force. Citizens review boards should have the authority that's required to maintain law enforcement legitimacy, but not to be engaged in the day-to-day operations of a police department. So that's the least intrusive part. Another analogy I would use that I thought of is, you don't want an APC showing up for a shoplifting incident at Walmart, right? That's the same analogy. It's the least intrusive. If we rolled up our 8-ton APC at Walmart every time we had a shoplifter, I think that would be pretty intrusive, and people would say, why do you have an APC for a shoplifter? I will say, if I could go back to this one time, I apologize for this, but as far as the varied purposes, I can say is involving discipline. The only one I found that involved discipline review was Wichita, and this is how they describe it. It's a post-review, so when I say post, after the investigation, post-review of discipline findings in alleged officer misconduct upon the request of the chief of police. So that's the only one I found that had anything to do with discipline authority. Sorry for not getting that out. This is the current complaint procedure. As you can say, you have there's a myriad of ways you can complain about or against a Salina police officer. I mean, if I'm going to date myself, but when I first started, I can assure you we didn't take anonymous complaints. We hardly took phone-in complaints, and we certainly never had any internet complaints. So, I mean, we've came a ways since then, but we will now take anonymous complaints. We will take telephone complaints. You could call from California and complain about how your uncle was treated on an arrest by us, and we'll take it. So as far as the ability to file a complaint against an officer here, I think it's there's many, many, many ways to file a complaint. This is our SPD online complaint form. This is found, again, if you Google the Salina Police Department, you'll find our webpage, and specifically on there, you can't read it right here, but that says Citizens Complaint or Accommodation Form. So if you click on that, and again, it's not buried, and I want to thank Commissioner Hodges again for her bringing it up, made us place it on the forefront, so it's a little bit easier to read, not to read, but to find now. But that's right there if you want to make a complaint against one of our officers. How many complaints do we actually get in any given year, or how many complaints have we received over the past 10, 13 years? I went back to 2007 here just because that's when the Law Enforcement Advisory Board was formed in 2007. And so you don't have to count. We've received a total of 11 bias-based complaints in the past 13 years. The 11, which obviously is less than one complaint a year. As far as use of force complaints, and at the end of here you'll understand why I'm bringing up use of force complaints. That number there is 33. So over the past 13 years, we've received 33 phone-in, walk-in, internet, whatever, complaints for use of force. If people wonder what a use of force is as far as what we report, it can literally be anything from a leg sweep to get you on the ground, the use of OC, any strikes with a baton, a taser if deployed, a canine bite, a handgun if pointed, a handgun if we discharge it, obviously. I mean, we take use of force reports for every force you can imagine. I mean, it's there, we have the data, so it's not like we don't have it. As far as the transparency part, I hear a lot. Should we put it out there? Yeah, we could, but I'm just saying we have it because we have to document every use of force we have. I think a couple relevant stats that I'll put out here that's not on the slide is what I'll say is, in the past 5 years, we've averaged over 44,000 calls for service. 44,000, I'll be exact if you want me to, 44,572. So the past 5 years, including officer-initiated calls for service, over 44,000 calls per year. During that, and I might add that I think the number is much higher because we encounter more than one person often. It's not just one person we encounter, but we only get one check, if that makes sense. So if we go to one call at Walmart and we handle 7 people and arrest 6 of them, that's only one check as far as contacts go or calls for service. So I think the number is much higher than 44,000, but I will stick with 44,572. So you look at the 5 years, I went and saw how many times we use force. So I would say yes, but I'm not going to do that. But how many times did we use force over 5 years for well over 222,000 calls for service? I can tell you that we used force 872 times. So 872 times out of 44,000 and change, we use force. And if you want to know what that amounts to, 0.4%. So 0.4% of the time that we've encountered citizens, we've used force. Another way to look at that is 99.6% of the time, we don't use force on those we police. 99.6% of the time. I think that's important when I'm talking about being the least intrusive, because if we're not using force 99.6% of the time, how intrusive do we have to be as far as a citizens review board goes? Here we get to the actual different models that I looked at, and all these different models, they all came from the Nicole organization I talked about. I think it is important to know that of these 4 models, reviewing completed internal affairs investigations is the most common oversight functions across all model types. That's important. They're reviewing internal affairs investigations. That's the most common thing that CRBs do nationwide. This is the first model we looked at. Pretty self-explanatory there. It's all about reviewing what we've done in an open meeting. This is the investigation focus model. This is, I won't say, well, it's considerably more intrusive, but it's also being used at very, very large departments. It says their New York Police Department. The New York Police Department has 36,000 cops. Okay, we have 84. So that's the model used in New York City, that right there. When I don't know if intrusive kind of sounds like a negative word, but the oversight is much, much, much greater with this model here. It also requires a lot of resources. I mean, you have to have very highly trained investigators. You have to have staffing. You have to have a place to put them. I mean, that may be appropriate for New York City. Different model, auditor/monitor focus model. It also requires a significant resources. I mean, you have to have auditors for one thing, but I mean, you have to have the staffing, you have to have the office space and such. I will leave that for a minute because there's quite a few bullets. And last, we have the hybrid model, which I do believe the hybrid model is pretty self-explanatory as far as what it does. It incorporates different things from the other 3, but it also could incorporate whatever you have right now. In other words, it could incorporate some things from our Law Enforcement Advisory Board. This is I don't want to call it the money slide, but this is the proposal that I am making for our city and our community, using the review focus model. This is important. Definitely want you to read this, as I know you will. Board members are approved. It's no longer where we are choosing our own board members. Certainly we'll be subject to the COMA and the CORA, Open Records and Open Meetings Act. We'll have a citizens forum agenda, as long as it doesn't involve personnel issues, because you can't have that in a public setting. An annual report will be prepared by the CRB to be presented to the City Commission to tell them the work they did over the past year. This came straight from the LEAB. I thought it's still relevant today, but that came from 2007. That exact verbiage came from 2007. This is the scope of work, proposed scope of work that I propose. This proposal is accepted. We are extending our scope to some extent because it won't just be bias-based policing. This board will also review use of force complaints. And it does say, in addition, in any SPD officer-involved shooting incidents, CRB members will be briefed upon completion of the KBI investigation and the review by the county attorney's office. I can say that we don't even talk about it once we turn it over to the KBI. So they have it for 30 to 45 days, and then it goes to the county attorney's office to review for potential charges or not charges against our officers. So we couldn't even talk about that for, several months in the first place, but it's certainly something that I would brief the CRB with when appropriate. This is additional responsibilities I propose for the CRB. That City of Lawrence, Kansas quote, I'll read that. It is not the board's duty to reinvestigate the alleged misconduct or any portion of the police department's investigation. It is to determine whether the PD's findings are supported by the evidence it had before it. That came straight from Lawrence, Kansas, Community Police Review Board bylaws. I do feel that this proposal, the review focus model, I think it addresses the majority of the identified shortcomings as described in the Sunflower Coalition policy proposal. And I'll list each one of them. The scope, it broadens the range of review from just a bias-based policing complaints to include use of force complaints. It also authorizes the review and recommends changes to all public disseminated policy. They are concerned with authority. It does provide additional authority in the form of an annual report regarding review by the board. By that I mean, if the board was to review 10 decisions that occurred, and if they disagreed with 10 of them, that would definitely come out in the annual report, and it would indicate, I don't know if it would indicate there's an issue with me or there's an issue, but we're not seeing things the same way. So it would definitely give them a little more authority. Transparency, just by abiding by CORA, Kansas Open Records Act, and COMA, Kansas Open Meetings Act, that increases tenfold the transparency. And I don't think we can argue about that. Maybe 20-fold, I don't know. But every open meetings opens everything, so that increases our transparency greatly. As far as membership goes, this will be decided by the commission, but members self-perpetuating themselves will cease. In other words, you'll put in just like any other board. There'll be a vetting process by the mayor, I believe that's correct, and then the mayor will present his selection to the commissioners, and they will approve or deny said applicants for the board. With that said, I will say the Sheriff's Department has been part of our Citizens Law Enforcement Advisory Board since its inception in 2007. So of course, they have stake in this too. I reached out to Sheriff Sultan and said, hey, wherever this goes, are you going to continue to be part of our Civilian Review Board? And I will read you his verbatim response. It has been my experience that a majority of the complaints that have been received involving unresolved criminal investigations. As such, I will not participate in a public discussion of the details of any such investigation. Personnel matters involving Sheriff's Office employees will not be held in a public setting. As the elected sheriff, it is my responsibility to administer disciplinary measures taken against Sheriff's Office employees when appropriate. I do not take this responsibility lightly and will not turn it over to a group of appointed citizens. That was just, I figured that question would come up, so I reached out to the sheriff for that very reason. And last slide here, I promise, there's always been other avenues that you can make a complaint against one of my officers if you're not happy with our investigation. And that's not since yesterday. You can always make a complaint to the Kansas Attorney General's office. That link there goes straight to a complaint form where you fill out online and you can complain against one of my officers, or you can go to the KVI. So it's not just our way or the highway. There's always been other avenues to file a complaint against a Kansas peace officer. And those are the two primarily ones besides having them internal. That is the end of that portion, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Nelson. As you can tell, there was quite a bit of time put in by Chief Nelson. We appreciate that. Guess I'm going to look to City Manager Scragg, and usually at this point we try to give some direction to staff as to how we want to move forward. Would that be your recommendation at this time from the?
Yes, that ultimate outcome would be helpful. I touch on a couple of things. This definitely is Chief's recommendation, but he's not on an island here. We've collaborated ever since the Kansas Wesleyan Forum to come up with this proposal, and I am in agreement that this is a reasonable approach. We're trying to strike a balance as the Chief described. And as you mentioned, we don't take formal action in city study sessions, but some consensus or direction would be helpful. Chief Nelson actually asked whether he should proceed with preparing bylaws and things at a greater level of detail, and I indicated we really need to have this conversation first and confirm the direction we're headed, and then we could proceed as directed. So with that, I think you're correct. If you want to field questions or pose questions to the Chief, that'd be a good starting point, and then we can take public comment.
I guess I would start with the commission, and let's address the 1033 surplus program. Do we have comments from the commission dealing with that?
Well, I will go on record saying I don't see any problem with continuation of participating, subject to the conditions that any acquisitions run through city commission review, preferably before the acquisition. Simply as a standpoint of touching base, that whole process of acquiring stuff kind of falls outside of our normal purchasing policy, and I think that merits a review before we proceed with that.
I agree with Commissioner Franz. I think that the Chief's proposal is well reasoned, and that's the way we should handle the 1033.
I concur as well. I think I'd agree with Commissioner France and Commissioner Ryan. I think a review is appropriate, and I don't think it's going to be too intrusive, so thank you.
I think that's an easy compromise. One somewhat related issue would be, and this point's been raised, on receiving materials from an agency like the Police Excellence Fund or any other organization that wants to donate to the police department. It has been raised that currently there's not much of any oversight on that. The only difference between those gifts and what we can get from the 1033 program is that things we pay for ourselves have to come through a budgetary process. So I think just as a side amendment to this issue, that needs to be resolved. I think the compromise the Chief presented for how to handle future acquisitions is easy. It allows for transparency and oversight. And if we haven't, this is obviously not some place we go shopping every year. But it's usually easier to be in a program and not use it than to try to join it at the last minute.
Okay, I'm trying to read body language and I can't see Commissioner Davis to determine when you're through. I would concur that any acquisition we make that is outside of that normal purchasing process whether it be donation or acquisition through 1033 or whatever, but at least we should be given the opportunity to accept the item, accept or authorize whichever version you take, again, because it is outside of our normal process.
And I do want to say, I'm not talking about a gift for the officer of the month or things I think we would all consider reasonable donation. We have many city agencies that have private boards that assist them. But for major hardware, just because we're not paying for it doesn't mean we should be aware of it and have some control over it.
Commissioner Davis, I've been here, that's already in place. As far as when we formed the SPD Excellence Fund, we had already agreed, as told, we will make what we've obtained so far has went before you, and not you personally, but the board. And I'm talking about the mobile shooting platform, that was $13,000. That actually fell below the $20,000, but we still went before you because that's an item that's gonna be owned by the city from here on out. So it becomes city property. Same thing with the Virtual 300 Judgment Simulator. That went before you too, because again, it's property that's gonna be owned by the city, and you're gonna have to maintain it. So we were already doing that, but like you said, the other things, the $100, no, we didn't do that. But any type of equipment that's gonna be owned on day two after being purchased by the Excellence Fund, that still has to be approved by you. And I might add, it's approved before we purchase it.
Thank you for clearing that up, appreciate it.
Okay, I believe we have consensus, Mr. Scragg, to move forward with verbiage for.
I think that's helpful, and we can bring you back a resolution that tries to formalize that.
There was the easy part. Okay, comments, questions for either any of the city staff dealing with the CRB proposal?
I'll just start down this end. My concern, when I listen to complaints from citizens about this board, a lot of this does involve personnel issues and has to be handled in the equivalent of executive sessions or closed meetings. But very often people have concerns about the process. Our board reviews complaints, and if something has happened, not all events result in complaints. People have to have a certain time, energy, and money to get a complaint started. And they have to not be afraid to file a complaint. But I would like to see this board looking at more than just things that have happened. If we carefully select certain data points, certain measures of behavior that we want to keep track of, we may see that we have a problem that we didn't know we had. We have an opportunity to prevent something from happening. Just because it hasn't happened in Salina yet doesn't mean that the conditions aren't right for something bad to happen here. On the other hand, we also have the opportunity to pat ourselves on the back and say, okay, rest of Kansas, this is what you ought to be doing. Our data backs it up. So I'd like to see this board, pick pick maybe 4 or 5 things that we're going to measure as our measure of how we do it. Hospitals, we have to report complications for each major type of operation. This is information you can go look up. So if you want to decide where to have your carotid artery opened up, look for the hospital with the least complication rate. Parks, cities tell you how many parks they have. If you're looking for a retirement place, you may want to look for a place that has a lot of parks. I don't think this, as any other city department, is necessarily immune from that, and we ought, anybody, no matter how good you're doing, you ought to always want to get better. And sometimes we just don't know what we need to do to get better. It doesn't mean you're doing a bad job, it just means you want to do a better job.
Commissioner Davis, do you have any examples of what those measurements you were thinking about are, just for the other commissioners and the audience?
Preface that answer by saying you probably need a statistician to wash your selection points out ahead of time so it'll be statistically valid, and one on the back end to wash the data so that you don't have unforeseen skewing or biases in the data. But as an example, you could look at males of any ethnic origin pulled over for traffic violations. Again, you have to take into account the time of day, neighborhood, et cetera. You can do it department, you can do it by officer. You can look at, I'm just making stuff up, well, this may not be made up, unholstering of a firearm. There is technology which will let you know when a firearm is unholstered. Do you have one person who's always pulling his or her firearm out? And again, I'm making, these examples up on the fly, but and a statistician could let us know, and a social scientist, which measurements of behavior are directly associated with those events that people perceive as biased policing. If they're experts in that matter, we can get that information. I'm not going to sit here and claim to know everything. But most of the data is probably already being collected when police make a stop. It's just a matter of asking the large computer in the sky to organize the data in a way that is meaningful to us to make decisions about our behavior. Now, Medicare doesn't ask the doctor, well, did you have a complication? They figure that out for us. So we get our data. Blue Cross sends us our data. So the information is there, you just have to organize it, have it properly scrubbed.
Gotta look at Police Chief Nelson. I'm guessing on the unholstering, we already have that data because that's considered a use of force. Would that be correct?
It's just pointing. So if you withdraw your weapon and you're not pointing at anybody, it's not collected. But if it is collected, if we point it at somebody.
Anything else?
I have lots of notes, but I'm assuming we're gonna have additional conversation, and it'll probably flow easier just after I hear the commissioners.
First of all, about that, additional conversations that I think that, we can have with all of you and amongst ourselves. We had, because time was so short at the Kansas Wesleyan Forum, we had made the promise to people that we would return, because there were a lot of people that didn't get to speak that night. And I would just like to know what our plans are for doing another public forum outside of this, because I'm just telling you, it's probably going to be 3 o'clock or after before we get to any public comment. And if everybody here wants to speak for 2 minutes, we're not going to get through a third of you. So, what are our plans for holding another forum? Have we discussed that or contemplated that? And is it something that the rest of the commission is interested in doing? I certainly am, but
I don't think we have any choice, but I came here to listen to what people wanted to, how they felt after they reviewed it. I already know how I feel, but I want to hear how my constituents feel.
Personally, I'm not interested in the city commission hosting any more public forums of this type. I think we've taken plenty of input, in my opinion, that might be handled by another entity of the city, the community relations or housing. But I'm always open to hear that input. But I think these meetings take up too much of our time and the senior staff's time.
I do have a few more questions whenever you're finished, Commissioner Frank.
Well, I'm not gonna address the forum question. It's fine if we have another forum. I know there were some people who did not get to speak at the last one we had. I don't know, have a sense beyond 1 or 2 that expressed that to me, how many there were. I do have some comments based on tonight. I'm not gonna be quite so shy as Commissioner Davis. I think we need to at least let the staff know how we're thinking about some of this, so that they have some idea of what to put together for future consideration. I would note that Chief Nelson indicated in his presentation that we do have a biased traffic-based policing comprehensive plan that was completed as of September 8th. Is that going to be considered for commission review and approval at some point? And I would think that would be appropriate. That's a question for the city manager, I believe.
The information that the chief's referring to is really things that we had in place that were responsive to the topics that were listed as part of the Attorney General's comprehensive plan. I think if you want to take it to the next level in terms of comprehensive planning, the first question I'd have is whether you want to task assuming we form a CRB, whether you want to task them with that. But if this governing body wishes to have a heightened comprehensive plan, we can certainly do that. Our response was the check boxes that are put forth by the Attorney General at the moment.
Follow-up question. Chief Nelson, if you could go back to the slide that says what constitutes a comprehensive plan, it's probably about halfway through. It's the first one with that title. On number 6, are we, what type of data collection are we currently providing? Is it part of the plan that Commissioner Friends was just referencing?
That's speaking about in addition to traffic tickets. So if you write a traffic ticket to somebody, it has a lot of information on there already. Name, date of birth, race, weight, height, etc. Where you live. I'm not sure about where you work, but anyway, it's all on there. That's if there's something in addition to that, that's the optional part. So right now, we take obviously all the information on the traffic citation ticket, but we don't have yet another form that might ask more questions. We do not have that form now, which by the way is optional. Thank you.
Would it be possible to follow up on that question just really quickly, because it was one of mine. We do consistently answer that question as no, and I apologize for referring to my cell phone during the meeting that I printed this out and forgot to bring it with. The email that I think we got today confirmed that SPD collects racial data on all encounters. Do I understand that correctly?
Chief, you might be able to speak to that, but it's a function of what's on the ticket or information that we gather.
Correct. And if we run into somebody at Walmart, we're not going to have that data. But I mean, if we're taking some type of law enforcement action and we have an opportunity to run them name and date of birth to see if they have a valid driver's license, to see if they have any warrants, then yes, all that information will be captured. But certainly not everybody we encounter.
Okay. Okay, so only if action then results from the encounter is the, okay, I guess I'm just having, I'm trying to reconcile the question from the Attorney General's annual report request versus the information that we got this morning. And I'm sorry to interrupt Commissioner Friends, but I wanted to get that.
Well, I just want to say I'm not satisfied with the answer. We say we've got a comprehensive plan. Almost everybody I know is going to expect to see a document of some sort that has these things laid out in some sort of organized format, and it doesn't sound like that is the case.
Well,
To be clear, we have a comprehensive plan that satisfies the Attorney General's standard, nothing more. And so if we want to develop a comprehensive plan beyond this standard, we could do that. But the question that brought all this to a head initially was the response on the prior slide of whether we have a comprehensive plan. That question, we tracked down what is the correct answer to that according to the Attorney General.
So essentially, according to the Attorney General, if we have all of the policies in place, address those 5 or 6 items they've listed, then we have a comprehensive plan.
Yeah, in fact, we asked the Attorney General's office for examples, and I'll let Chief tell you what we were told.
That is true. They don't review them, they don't collect them. And to answer the previous statement, we do have the documents you're talking about, which was just made September 9th. But it is, it's a collection, which is what you just said. It's a collection of our response to the question on do you have a comprehensive plan? And yes, we have that. The Attorney General's office, we submit it, but they don't collect them. They just, we put yes, they don't review it. That's just how they handle it.
A couple of comments about some of the other stuff. We talked a little bit about board composition, and I think that's important. And I was wondering if Chief or other staff have any ideas about what kind of size of board we might be talking about, length of terms, who may be qualified or not qualified. There's lots of detailed questions there that I think I'm gonna have to see before I can really make a judgment about where we're going. A couple of thoughts do occur to me is I think it ought to be a fairly open selection process. You know, there has been some discussion about what's termed a conflict of interest. It's not, but that's what it's described as. Having somebody on the board who has a family member, either on this police department or another. And I think what they're trying to get at is that that person would likely be biased one way or another, and that those individuals should not be allowed to serve. And I have an issue of trying to define who might be biased ahead of time, because most of us, well, I have anyway, I've gotten traffic tickets before for speeding and such. And you know, that might just bias me against the police because, you know, I think they're picking on me, if I have that mindset. You aren't gonna find citizens who don't have some sort of pre-existing ideas about this issue. What we need to look for are citizens who have the capacity to set that aside when they look at the specific circumstances they're going to be evaluating. I'm not sure that we need to try to predefine, you know, this subgroup of people who might have a bias and say, you can't be a part of this because we're extended to the extreme of having received a traffic ticket. Maybe there's 3 people in this room who would qualify, maybe. So it all depends on where you want to draw that line. So I think it ought to be fairly open. And I'm going to throw this out there for discussion. Maybe one member should be from the Human Relations Commission so that there's a tie back to that organization, also a city group. I have questions, and this is probably a question partially for the city attorney, but I don't want an answer now. And that is, the chief of police is listed as an ex officio member, and I need to understand what the implications of that are beyond being just an advisory staff member or supporting staff member. Director of planning is not an ex officio member of the planning commission, for example. And so I need to know what implications that might have as far as operation of the board goes.
I can try to answer that one when you're ready.
Okay.
That was my suggested term. The intent really was not to find the chief precluded from an executive session conversation about the result of an investigation and a recommendation that would be coming to them from the board. Ex officio may not be the best way to term that. I didn't want them to be a voting member of the board, but wanted them to be able to observe executive session until they could get direct feedback.
Okay. And then I guess my last, okay, 2 comments. You know, if we go through this process and the committee hears the report on an investigation, and they agree with the outcome of that report, and they say everything is good, the police department did what they were supposed to do, there's no problem, we all go on. But if they disagree, then what's the next step?
We talked about that at length. I equated it to the disciplinary advisory board that currently exists, where employees can appeal a decision of the city manager to the disciplinary advisory board, and they serve in an advisory capacity. They hear it, they render a decision, and then in that case, the city manager takes that under advisement. And as Chief Nelson mentioned, in this scenario, my vision would be that it to be very similar. The annual reporting aspect of that is probably twofold. Number one, if the conclusion of the investigation is that the complaint was founded, we need to report that as well, so that agreement isn't just perceived as a positive necessarily. But then, as Chief Nelson mentioned, above and beyond just being advisory to the chief of police, if we see as a governing body or I as the city manager see discord between, a pattern of discord, then there's reason to think that we have more to look into, and as city manager, I would be involved, and the governing body would have enough information to raise the question as well.
Okay, so the reporting frequency is gonna be great enough where we will be able to see that other than on an annual basis.
Yeah, depending on the volume of complaints, yeah, I think we could provide ongoing reporting.
If I could add to that, also a slide about other avenues to file a complaint. So if you don't concur with whatever our findings are, that is another avenue of complaint for people, other than the CRB.
Well, I guess my thoughts are that the Chief Nelson's proposal is very reasonable and well thought out. I'd like to see if the staff can get it in front of us so that you can read what we're approaching here.
So, first of all, I just really would like to thank the members of law enforcement, the currently serving members of the Law Enforcement Advisory Board. And it was interesting for me to hear today, I don't know if a lot of you were aware of this, I certainly wasn't, that the board's purpose and its function had grown and changed organically over the years. And rather than having this devolve into some sort of, us versus them or their versus us conversation, I hope that, we can keep this communication open as we have these discussions. I had a question, like, in the CRB, in the review model of the CRB, can the CRB request additional investigatory material in the event that they have further questions? What does that look like? I mean, aside from subpoena power, which I realize presents an entirely different level of power, if there are additional materials that the board would like to see, how is that accommodated?
We actually discussed that at length, and I'm gonna let Chief Nelson answer that if you
Appreciate that. Well, if you would repeat the question again.
Oh, in the review model that you proposed?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Can the CRB request additional materials should they find that necessary?
They certainly can, but it would not be an open session. It'd be in a closed session where they could look at disciplinary type information. And I see no reason why we would not provide them what they asked for, but again, it would be in a closed session.
Right, I
Yes.
understand that. And then I don't know that we want to go into it now because of time constraints, but I wasn't really clear on the auditor monitor model that you had proposed, and I would like to have more information about that. Let's see, to confirm a CRB would be concerned solely with the Salina Police Department, and then the sheriff's department would be able to pursue whatever avenue or not pursue whatever avenue that they chose to pursue. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. Just responding to something, Commissioner France's observation about all of us having inherent bias. I mean, it is. It's just a fact of life. However, I do have concerns about the fact that there is so much overlap between the current Law Enforcement Advisory Board and the Police Department Excellence Fund. I think they both have their own purpose, but in terms of imagining the two as a Venn diagram, I'm not sure that it should look like a complete circle. So I do have some concerns about conflicts of interest in terms of, I'm just here to tell you, just looking at my own life, if you were to tell me a story about, an OBGYN, I'm definitely gonna have a bias one way or the other because my husband is an OBGYN. So I do have some concerns about the composition of any kind of citizen review board, in terms of making sure we're never gonna have something that's 100% perfect or 100% neutral, but I think it's important for us to acknowledge that those two boards serve different roles. And then a component that I didn't see as a part of this presentation is one of the things that the Sunflower Coalition had brought up is a component where an officer who had concerns, criticisms, problems within the department would actually have a body outside of the chain of command that they could bring their problems to. And I don't see this referenced anywhere in the presentation, and I don't know if that's under consideration as part of this board's responsibilities.
Well, in all honesty, I don't know that we discussed that at length. We talked about the anonymous aspect of it and their ability to review policies and procedures, but we hadn't really spoken to that in specifics. And tying two topics together, Chief, if you go to the LEAB's language about their makeup, you touched on that, but I don't know that the Chief read it, and I think he and I are both in agreement that is well reasoned, and our recommendation is to continue that. Chief, you might go ahead and read that if you would.
Continue current LEAB recommendation that the board will reflect the racial/ethnic diversity of Salina, Saline County. This does not mean that the board membership must match the city of Salina or the county of Salina racial/ethnic demographics. It is recommended that minority groups be overrepresented on this board.
So I'm just going back to the internal concerns
right.
aspect at this point, and I want to get into the whole police retention study that we have done, and some of the concerns reflected in that, but it's that a significant number of our current and former employees have concerns about reporting their problems and their concerns to superior officers, and that there may be a mechanism needed outside of how we currently handle that.
And would you talk that through? This may be that body, but we didn't talk about the mechanics of that.
Yeah, the only reason I asked is when I was reviewing the coalition's proposal in preparation.
That's what HR, in my opinion, we have a human resources department. That's what they're for, and they've done that in the past. In fact, they did it a few months ago. A complaint went completely passed out of the station directly to HR, and I'm perfectly fine with that. And that's, to me, why we have HR.
Question for City Manager Scragg. A complaint from a police officer or fireman should be handled really no different than somebody from Parks and Rec or anything, correct? As far as going to the appropriate.
The personnel policy provides for the chain of command. It provides for a grievance process that kind of heightens the chain of command. But the general expectation, whether it's the police department or any other agency, you'll follow the chain of command, or will be inundated with all sorts of issues at the city manager's office or HR level. But having said that, there are occasions where there's reluctance, reticence, whatever you want to say, on the part of an employee that they don't believe that the chain of command is going to be effective, and they're reluctant to raise a concern.
Thank you. I just have a couple comments, and then we'll open it up to the public. As I was looking at, and this is something probably for our attorney, I'm still having a hard time figuring out how we address transparency while still keeping the confidentiality for both the police officer that may be involved in something, also with the complaint. You're trying to be transparent, but I still think there's a certain amount of confidentiality, and so we need to work through that. That also, then that ties into the coma core also, so I need some direction there, how we're gonna address that. I personally, from reading and looking at things, have a real problem with this board, however we set it up, having any type of disciplinary authority. Also, with any type of pre-investigation or subpoena powers, I think this board will be lay people, and the lack of experience would be detrimental to those groups addressing some of those items. Again, I think there's 5 different individuals up here. I'm thinking we probably have 5 different ways to go about this. So I think what we'll do is we'll take some comments from the public. Again, I look at the numbers, and it appears that our police force has done an excellent job, and our numbers of complaints are minimal compared to I think what we forget, and I'm glad that Police Chief Nelson mentioned this, is the number of calls that we have per year. We hear about the 1 or 2 bad ones, but we don't hear about the numbers that go as should be every year. So, getting back on the Excellence Fund, I do believe, and maybe somebody can help me out here, currently, we only have 1 member of the Excellence Fund that is a member of the LEAP, is that correct?
That is correct.
So, okay. So it's not like it's a majority of the LEAP is made up by Excellence Fund members, so I think that's something to keep in mind, so.
If I could address that. Having one person, it doesn't matter how personally responsible the gentleman is, because I would vouch for his personal integrity. It's the perception of transparency and fairness. And that, a lot of this is about perception. That's what transparency is. Do we think that you're doing a good job? Some of these issues, is transparency, some of the facts you can't bring up, but the process can be transparent. And I think the purpose of those 2 organizations is so different that the leadership of one should not be the leadership of the other. Now, on the other hand, the current members of the LEAB, should certainly be offered the opportunity to transition to the new board. You got people with experience. There are lots of things you look at in the board composition, but whatever we request, nothing will make up the experience they already have. But I think the perception of conflict of interest between those 2 groups is too great to change.
Commissioner Davis, if I could, just to be clear, the leadership of both is not the same person. Just to be clear, the head of each group is not the same person.
Well, I'll just put out on the table, I don't think leadership of the Police Excellence Fund should be in the LEAP. I could join I guess I could join the Police Excellence Fund and send money in every year, but I wouldn't be setting policy, leading the organization. And that would be a little different from being a policy setter for Police Excellence Fund, and then judging the type issues that the board will have to judge.
Just to that comment, I agree that it does cause, it is different when you look at it from the outside, and when it's brought to my attention, not that I didn't know before, but I can see why there's a cause of concern with that. But again, I was just making a point that it wasn't the same leader for both of the groups. But there is one member on both organizations. Thank you.
Okay, we have till about 10 till 4, and at 10 till 4 we'll be headed to the other meeting. So we have individuals that would come forward, and you might even kind of line up so we don't have to come from clear across the room, and you have 2 minutes. And please give name and address.
Okay, Joe Hay, 109 Baker Street. This is still hard for me after 45 years, but June 13th, 1975, not a typical work day. As I was working in a local service station on I-70 and 81 that morning, when a car pulled into the southeast parking lot, followed by a Salina patrol car. I wasn't busy, so I decided to wander and see what was going on. I no sooner got to the back of the patrol car when shots rang out. I took cover behind a payphone, and then I watched Officer Ivy and the suspect engaged in a gun battle that ended in an execution-style gunshot on Officer Ivy. He then took the officer's shotgun and ran back to his car and sped off. I ran to the aid of the officer while holding Officer Ivy on my lap. While he lay dying, I keep pleading on his police radio, please, we need an ambulance. We have an officer that is down. I pleaded and pleaded. It seemed like it took forever for them to show up. If you ever had someone fight for their life while holding them on your lap, it would change your outlook forever. As I look back today, I wonder if Officer Ivy would have had some PPE. Would he be alive today? I don't know, maybe. As a city, we need to make sure that all of our first responders go home safe every night to their families. That means whatever equipment is needed, we make sure we get it for them. We should not take away or question what is needed to keep our officers safe. I am asking the City Commission, please do not bend to a group that questions our police force on the safety of our officers. Please do not bend on the removal of our Citizens Review Board. We need another appointed board for another appointed board. Please do not bend on the 1033 program. We need all resources available. Please do the right thing.
For the sake of time and decorum, I'm going to please ask that we not clap or boo, or let's, if we could. We have a lot to get through, so thank you.
Mary Marshall, Salina. I'm reading this.
Mary, could you pull the microphone in? I'm sorry, so we hear. Thank you.
I'm reading this on behalf of Randy Rep, and he is a retired officer. The Sunflower Coalition has disclosed neither their entire membership nor any relationship with parent or ancillary organizations. Any alliance can recruit a handful of local representatives and present themselves as a homegrown organization when they are actually external agitators. No information has been presented about the sources of funding of TSC. Again, without complete and transparent disclosure, it is entirely possible that an outside entity could enter Salina for any number of motives and petition the Salina City Council to adopt policies which favor their own interests above the interests of the citizens of Salina. This would inherently antithetical to both the mission of the council and the expectation of Salina's populace. Allowing an unknown entity to claim to represent the best interests of the citizens of Salina would set a reckless and inherently dangerous precedent for any future external organizations seeking to curry favor or influence against the wish of Salina voters. Because of these reasons, I strongly encourage you to dismiss these and any future petitions of TSC until they have offered complete disclosure of their membership, sources of funding, and level of involvement, affiliation, or participation of both the organization and their members with any parent or ancillary organizations. TSC has offered no solution for either funding or training of a civilian review board. In addition, they have offered no examples of rogue officers nor provided any other local sources that are out of town, most from out of state. They are attempting to address national issues on the local stage when no local problems have been identified. Personnel actions for all city employees have been handled in a uniform manner as governed by city and department policy. Creating a separate mechanism of discipline outside the span of city and department control would set an alarming precedent for any city departments and could result in a chilling effect on hiring and
Dalton McDowell, Salina. The Salina Police Department the Salina Police Department does, if they need what they need, if they come to the council and Chief Nelson says he needs another APC or whatever, I would be all for getting the Salina Police Department what they need to protect their officers. I don't know, everybody should know this, but 3 weeks ago, one of the Salina police officers was shot. And if he didn't have, and he was shot in the foot, but it could have been anywhere that he was shot at. And if they didn't have the bulletproof vest that is required by state and all the equipment that they have, who knows how that could have ended. And if you take away all their automatic stuff, SWAT stuff, that leaves the Kansas Highway Patrol SWAT team to cover Salina and all the way to the Nebraska-Colorado state line. There's not one SWAT team between here and those state lines. I am not for defunding anything with the police department, and the Sunflower Coalition is a joke. If you look at what happened in Minneapolis, Minneapolis is having police officers retire or resign all the time due to their council defunding their police department. And if the council defunds the Salina Police Department, I almost can guarantee you will not be on the council next election cycle.
Again, I ask that you hold your applause, and again, if you could keep your comments. Today we're talking about the 1033 and the review board. We're not talking, there's no defunding that's been discussed up here, or has it been discussed at any other meetings by this commission, so. Yes.
Carolyn Peterson, 2052 Leland Way in Salina. The last time I spoke regarding the Sunflower Coalition's presentation, I shared that all boards and committee process should always be reviewed occasionally. That review may result in changes, and it also may mean that things that are being reviewed are fine. A review has been completed as evidenced by Chief Nelson's proposal. The policy presented by the coalition was used as a reference, but some of their suggestions did not have sound reason. Facts based on hands-on experience and training in the field of work far outweigh internet research and picking and choosing facts. Those that live and breathe law enforcement every day. My words to the City Commission previously were, committees recommend and management makes decisions. Now is the time for management to make a decision and support the Citizens Review Board proposal as presented by Chief Nelson.
Steve Klein, Salina, Kansas. Chief Nelson, thank you for your time and your patience and giving us a very transparent, detailed operation how your department works. So what's the problem? The problem is we don't know nothing about the coalition that's coming in here. So what do? I go look on the internet last night, clicked on the link, Facebook page came up. What's the first thing I see? A clenched fist. Where else have we seen clenched fist? That would be with Black Lives Matter. So why don't they have a United States flag on there, a Kansas flag, or a Blue Lives Matter flag for that reason? That's very, very, very a cautionary tale for us all to think about. So I go down and I look on their site. I see a posting on there. Just a posting. It says Prison Policy Institutes. The data is clear. Police overwhelmingly arrest people with social, economic, and health problems that cannot and should not be addressed through incarceration. I have health problems. I've never been arrested for that. Have any of you? I haven't seen that yet. That's a post on their page. You go further on, hashtag defund the police. I know you're not talking about that. That may not be what their direct motive is, but if I was a professional and looking to police, the police departments is very important. I would not have hashtag defund the police. We just revitalized our downtown. Infrastructure, facades, buildings. Black Lives Matter said they're going to move to suburban area. So we neuter our police, hashtag defund the police. We have nothing left. Do you really want to destroy those millions of dollars that may or may not be destroyed down there? I don't think that's a wise decision. We don't need a Trojan horse called the Sunflower Coalition in Salina, Kansas.
James, Salina family lives in Salina. Chief Nelson, I'd like to ask you, how's the morale of your officers been since February? Be honest, a true morale.
Try to be honest all the time, sir. It's gone down, I mean, definitely, because of what's been occurring.
Exactly. I'd like to challenge these council members or anybody else. As a retired law enforcement officer from a different metro area, I'd like to challenge every one of them to take a 40-hour work week and ride a midnight shift. Not one day, not a day they choose, not a day or swing shift with everything's quiet. Get in that car and ride a midnight shift when it's dirty. I also would like to ask, as my doctor Dr. Davis, how would it be felt if I'd have backseated you when you cured me of meningitis in November, which I get kind of emotional? You wouldn't have. Me sitting on the board to direct you how to cure me wouldn't have worked. So I don't understand how anybody in a layman position can get on a board and talk about law enforcement and what they do. Go out there and work it. Don't wear a name tag saying I'm a commissioner or I'm for this group. Go out there and work it with them guys and act like you're a cadet or you're a recruit and see what these guys go through every night, every day, 365 days a year. They don't take a break, but everybody else gets a break. They go and they run to stuff, but everybody else runs away. Thank you.
I know we're not asked to, but you know, your secretaries of defense aren't necessarily military people. You don't have to experience something to be able to see how it's working.
Miranda Bachman, Salina campus. I actually just have a couple questions. I'm curious about the bias complaints and about the number of them. Are those complaints that have been followed through and like filed and processed, or are those just general complaints that somebody calls and say, hey, so-and-so treats me unfairly?
They're obviously investigated fully.
Okay, and then I was also wondering about like the ABC vehicle. What's the process in that? How long does it take for the ABC to show up? Like I know in 2019 when you used it for a search warrant, surely there's steps that have to be taken before that, or not?
Well, as I stated, I have to approve it. I mean, it has to be a very serious offense and occurring or is about to occur. And yes, we have to have time to bring the APC there. Yes.
Sure. So like recently, correct me if I'm wrong, was it used as a guard, as a guard for the vehicle to not go through, or what was the recent use of it for?
Back in March, slide, that was for the individual that was barricaded inside with the hostage that eventually burned his house down.
Okay. Okay. I think that was it. I just wanted to thank you for all the many hats that you wear. I know you all have your own businesses and other jobs that you do, so I wanted to thank you for showing up and appreciate the supply chain.
My name's Ron Stiles. I'm a retired Salina police officer. I retired with 43 years of service. I also served 6 years in the Marine Corps and 6 years in the Kansas Army National Guard. In the Salina Police Department, you had one of the finest in the state. It just didn't get that way by happen chance. It got that way by policing itself. Police officers are the most watched and scrutinized individuals, and the Salina Police Department is no different. A police officer's worst critic is another officer. That's a fact. What I don't understand is how an individual that has no concept of what a police officer is or does can dictate how he or she should do his or her job or what type of equipment they should use while doing their job. If critics were asked to do the job, they wouldn't make it out the door. One reason being they wouldn't want to be scrutinized as much as they are scrutinizing officers in the department. The problem with critics, they jump to conclusions before knowing the facts. That's the difference between a police officer and their critics. So why change something that is not broke and has worked well? So I'm asking you to show your police officers how you can care and appreciate them. Because you know if you need them, they're going to come running.
Hi again. Santiago Vasquez, Salina, Kansas. Yeah, I came back for today to see how this would go through. I just wanted to make a couple points. I know we've already presented to you all of our information. You know, at this point, restating all of it would be redundant. So one thing I did want to point out is through hearing all of the things that people have said here, it's important to remember that one very hyper-specific demographic is overrepresented in this room, and that is the continuing trend in every single one of these sort of public forums that we have with the city commission. So obviously the kinds of narratives of people who would be affected by the police department's misconduct are not here. And those people obviously aren't going to be out here because they're working at 2 p.m. on a Monday. Those people work hard, a lot of the times harder than most people, and will see the worst effects of what is being ignored, and the reason behind the proposal. Just yesterday on a church outing, you know, out to the lake, I had 3 other individuals come up to me and talk to me about how they felt personally persecuted by the police department and felt wrong and felt they had no recourse in order to correct that, either because of their legal status, their financial status, because they worked too much, things that they simply could not take into account. So I think that some of the things that were presented in this were intentionally misleading, in the fact that they kind of avoided some of the systemic factors behind the numbers. Like when you show that we only have like 1 or 2 different complaints every year, that doesn't take into account how many people are discouraged from complaining, either because of a language barrier, because of their financial status, legal status, or believing that the bureaucracy won't help them since everything is internal and they don't have an external source to file a complaint. Even in some time inside the police department, listening to the police officers talk about some of these things, I still haven't gotten a clear answer on how we measure the ways that internal investigations work. So, yeah.
If I could just respond once to that. I would just say that we absolutely keep track of how many complaints that come in, so we have a factual number for the complaints we receive. You have just speculation. You have no way to know how many number of people that are complaining other than your speculation. I have actual numbers.
You know, I am quite confused on how you completely missed the point of what I just said. You have the numbers, and that's obviously true, and I agree that those numbers are real. What those numbers don't tell you is how many people did not feel encouraged to actually file a complaint because of many different systemic factors, one of which is language. And as I see it here, it seems that the forums that we go to are not designed for those people. I see no translation here. I see no...
Whoa, stop.
Yeah,
Whoa. We can clear the room. We don't have to agree with each other. You got 10 more seconds, but let's be respectful, please.
But yeah, like I said, there are factors that are not measured in those numbers that will not be shown in the statistics that you have provided. I'm also confused why you have so many different files on a comprehensive plan and you didn't feel encouraged to bring them here or to show them to the city commission beforehand if you already have them. It just seems just a lot of...
We have a lot of other people. Thank you.
Liz Johnson, Salina, Kansas. Just wanted to continue what Santiago was saying about how, like, part of my work is working with statistics and numbers, and we learned that the statistics that you use are always based on what questions you're asking, who you're getting, how you're getting them, how the systems affect that. So when we're questioning these statistics, we're not questioning that they're not real, we're just questioning like what's being missing, what's being made invisible by the way that the systems work. And that's why it's important to like ask, you know, where these are coming from and like what else we could be doing to address things. I wanted to address a few things about the Citizens Review Board, and that I feel like a lot of this presentation was saying, you know, other people, no one else is doing these things, no one else is doing this, and we should always be striving to like question, are we doing the best that we can, not are we doing the same as other people. And also Lawrence's Citizen Review Board is like asking for more power. They are saying there are things that we want to address that we're not addressing. One other thing is that on one of these slides, you quoted the NAACP, and the NAACP did endorse our proposal. So just want to make those points and support the Sunflower Coalition's proposal. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Irina Scolino, and I live here in Salina, Kansas. One of the things that quite frankly confuses me here during this discussion is how, like, I'm not saying it's not great, but like, I don't see why there's so much opposition to a CRB. Like, if our officers are doing such a great job going through with like bylaws and the restrictions that are like currently going on, then like, I don't see how having a CRB would affect any of the work that any of our officers do here in Salina. And you know, if like Brad Nelson is doing his job as a police chief, well, having a CRB will just make sure that he's doing his job correctly, as all of these people are claiming here. And it's just good, just to go off of what Dr. Davis was saying, is that these measures are being put into place to ensure that if something bad does happen, we have those measures and like those precautions to find a way to like deal with those issues. And this is more of like a proactive way to like view these issues. And quite frankly, I'm also confused on why people are pressuring so much to see the membership of the TSC. To be quite honest, we're just a bunch of Salina County members and citizens here that are just wanting to make sure that we are having the best city that we can. To quote, quite frankly, all of you, we try to have the best city that we can, and just stopping here because we think it's good enough doesn't mean that we have to stop here. We should be constantly striving. We are actually quite fortunate to have quite a small town, so we can make those substantial changes that actually do help these individuals. And to go off of what Santiago was saying, the majority of these people in this room do not experience the issues that we are highlighting here. In fact, the study session is held at 2 o'clock. What working person do you know can come out here at 2 o'clock? When we look at the statistics, we can see that BIPOC are the ones that experience these myriad of negative effects when interacting with officers, yet they are not here. And when we start having these discussions, it's quite intimidating when you actually look at these Facebook groups, because we see that threats of violence have been made against the TSC itself. So I ask you, how do you expect us to voice our concerns when we have citizens threatening us? Thank you.
James Bowden, Salina, Kansas. I'm willing to bet that most everybody in this room is in favor of government oversight. And having a citizens review board is a way of ensuring that we have oversight over our governing body, whether it be police or others. Some things that are well-intentioned in the beginning and are doing a good job at one point in time may not always sustain that status. So considering how things could change over time is important when we're talking about starting this citizens review board. The second thing I'd like to address is that the things that we're training our police officers to do aren't always against some foreign enemy or somebody from outside of the city or outside of the state. Sometimes it's against our own citizens. We're training our officers to do these things in relation to the people within this community. Now, we may all be upstanding citizens here, but I bet we have friends that are complex. And for them to undergo any circumstance where they may be injured or shot or anything else in regards to police training, we need to consider that these are our neighbors and friends as well. So, thank you.
I'm Mike Sweeney. I'm a retired Salina police officer, and I just wanted to make sure we remind everybody that police officers, the most scrutinized profession in all other professions in the United States. If you already look, they already got a body cam which records every movement they have. If they're inside the vehicle, they got a camera going on there. They also, at the police department, record every phone call that is being made, and also they have to document in the reports, and any use of force that they already do, it gets reviewed immediately by their immediate supervisor, and then it gets passed on to the patrol captain who reviews it. Then it gets reviewed by the deputy chief of police, and then it gets reviewed by the chief of police, and then also gets reviewed by the internal affairs officer. And then it doesn't stop there. If the person's arrested, then that person's attorney reviews all the documents that they have and the videos. It gets reviewed by the city attorney, it gets reviewed by the county attorney, and also gets reviewed by judges and juries. And the only concern I have is that every time there's an incident that happens within the United States, we always have to feel that we have to add something else to watch the police department. And we already record a number of statistics to show that we, or the police department, is doing a good job. But it seems like it's never good enough, that we always have to keep adding things to to prove that they are not being bias-based policing. I got 9 seconds, but everything takes time. So every time you add something, it takes time away from the officer from doing their job. And then also, it makes the officer in fear that they are being overly watched, and it could affect their safety because they're going to be doing things that they should be doing, but afraid the perception is going to put them in harm's way.
Good afternoon. I'll just start again by noting that folks who work a 9-to-5 job can't be here today, and folks that are concerned about getting the coronavirus can't be here today. Judging by the number of people in this room who are not wearing a mask suggests to me that a lot of people here don't take the pandemic seriously, and so I want to encourage people who are listening to the Salina Media Connections live stream of this, reminding them that they can submit their comments via email to the City Commission. Thank you for providing multiple ways of input into this process. Second of all, I just want to say that I have read the Sunflower Coalition's proposal and the study notes for this session and just lend a voice of support to that. I see this, there is indisputably an epidemic of racist police violence in this country, and just because we haven't seen something terrible happen here yet doesn't mean that we shouldn't be striving to make sure something bad doesn't happen and help our city be the safest place it can be for all people. For the folks who are confused or angry about this proposal, you should ask yourself first, what might not I understand about what people are asking for, and what can I do in my community to actually make sure that everybody has the right to live a dignified and safe life? That should be your first move. And third, I just want to add a point about the 1033 program, which I liked the language of, about ending the Salina Police Department's use of the 1033 program, which I do support. I see that as a way of preventing the police department from getting excess military equipment beyond what they need to perform their duties in Salina. The language that I saw presented to the City Commission basically matches exactly the Republican-led Montana bill that passed preventing police departments in Montana from using the 1033 program to get military equipment. This was a bipartisan bill. This shouldn't be controversial. We don't need tanks or really high-level military equipment to keep the city of Salina safe. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brian Frazier. I'm president of the Salina NAACP. We do support the proposal that the Sunflower Coalition has put up. And I want all you folks to see my face, because I'm not going to hide behind a mask or anything. I want you to see me. I'm a person of color. There are people out there all the time getting shot just because they're persons of color and they might have committed a crime. Commissioner Ryan, you said you don't have time to listen to the citizens anymore about this. You were put in your position to listen to these citizens. Take the time. What's it gonna hurt? We need oversight. We need accountability. No one wants to defund the police department, so all you folks out there saying you want to defund the police department and you think that's what they want to do, really, they don't. We just want a better police department. We want the one that protects all of us. You know, you might think that we've got the best police department in the world. I don't know if there is a best police department in the world. I don't think we have a whole police department full of bad cops. I don't know if we have any bad cops on our police department. But transparency makes sure that they don't show up. And so what are you afraid of by having someone really look at the police department? What is your fear? Loss of power? What? So, you know, let's look at this seriously. Let's take it into consideration. Let's not say, well, we don't have time to listen. Because if you don't have time to listen to us, what did we put you on the board for?
Chief Nelson and to all of our law enforcement in the room and anywhere we have. I'm alive today because of Officer Londano. March of 2007, my husband at the time was a Army vet, and he had a plan to kill me. Officer Londano is the one that took it seriously and saved my life by the actions he did. At that point in time, I thank God we didn't need the equipment that's available now. But my husband at the time had the training that military have. He was in Iraq and he saw things. And had he had access to the weapons that he had access to, at that night, they would have needed the vehicle to get a wall out of my house to save my life. Again, Chief Nelson, do we want to need those equipments in that vehicle? No. But in that time, if I'm in my home and he was in there with me and they needed it and they didn't have it, I would be dead. There are things that happen that we don't want to admit that happen. We don't want to see it and we don't want to deal with it. We want to push it under the rug. But it's law enforcement that goes out and comes to those calls. It's not Carl Ryan, it's not Dr. Davis, it's none of you that go to those calls. It's not even me. These people need the equipment to do the job to keep their community safe. And at that point, they don't know at all times what color the person inside that home is that's doing these things. So it's not a racial issue for everything that goes on. It's a community safety issue.
Okay, I would like to thank everyone for attending today. Obviously, we're not completed with this, and we'll be hearing further. Thank you.